Forget everything you know about learning programming. Taking a course to familiarize yourself with a programming language and then building personal projects is the wrong way to go. You will end up plateauing and wasting your time doing things that no longer meaningfully grow your knowledge or develop your skills. I worked in big tech and in fintech, both at a growing startup and a medium-sized company. And with that experience in mind, I can tell you that you don't even need a degree or a bootcamp. And if I could go back in time, I would have used the exact framework I'm going to show you, regardless of whether you're a beginner or not, to learn coding and truly develop technical expertise.
You heard him.
First things first, coding basics. There is no coding without a programming language. If you already know something that is widely used like JavaScript, then feel free to stick with it. Otherwise, just pick Python. It's super robust and versatile thanks to its large community. It has great documentation and it's also used by almost any company. There are many introductions. Choose one and follow it. Make sure you understand the basics such as instantiating variables and objects and defining methods and classes. Don't try to learn more than that. Python has many concepts and features, but you will waste up your time if you're going to painstakingly dive into those.
I understand nothing.
You will learn those organically, I promise, and you will see how in a few minutes. So at this point, you know basic Python and you can understand the most common basic pieces of code written in Python. This is where expanding your knowledge and continuing growing your technical skills will kind of plateau if you start working on personal projects or web apps doing CRUD stuff, because you will rarely learn something meaningful from doing that. You might learn about some library or additional features in Python, but you will always have this gap between the basic real tutorial code and the actual real world code. And you won't get over that initial barrier that I always had when doing these cookie cutter projects during university. And this is where the framework comes into play. Now you're going to do some work on open source projects that are widely used in tech companies, and I'm going to show you exactly how. You can always follow a tutorial for some coding project on YouTube, get it over with on a weekend, and then put it on your resume. But if you really want to stand out whenever you apply, whether as an intern, entry, or even a senior level, and actually build your technical chops, then hear me out. With open source, you're going to work on a real project that is used and worked on by many software engineers. And you're going to actually learn coding. This is one of the best signals you can give to hiring managers and technical recruiters. My roommate in college had some open source work that he put on his resume. And even though his GPA was below 3.3 and he went to a no-name school, he was hearing back from applications so many times.
My phone has been ringing off the hook.
And if you think about it, it actually makes sense because hiring managers for engineering positions usually have extensive technical experience, so they recognize that work. Finally, as a small but a really nice bonus, working on open source projects is going to help you learn lots of good coding practices and general processes that engineers go through, like code reviews, using version control and working in the terminal, and working in a shared repository. To get started, you're going to choose one project. Python has many projects doing lots of cool and awesome things. For example, Poetry is a package and dependency management tool. Many projects have many dependencies, libraries that are imported and used. The libraries are code too that also have dependencies. So you have that dependency tree that sometimes might have conflict. So you have one library that requires a specific version of some dependency, but you also have another library that requires a different version of that dependency, and you have a conflict.
Round 1, fight!
Poetry helps manage these dependencies and resolve conflicts whenever they arise, which are quite common in large code bases. Another different example is Click, that creates a nifty command line interface for Python. When you start a Python program, you need to type Python and then type the file that contains the Python program. Sometimes the driver or main function that gets called first when you call a Python program accepts command line arguments. And this is what Click helps to improve. There are many projects. What's important is that you choose something that interests you and that is well outside your comfort zone, so long it's not something that it's so large that it contains tens of thousands of lines of code. So yeah, you're probably thinking that, hey, I just learned the basics of some programming language and you're telling me to jump into a project that other hundreds of software engineers are working on? Well, yes, that's exactly what I'm telling you. The reason is that tutorials and pet projects will never cut it. You can do dozens of them, but you will always feel the gap between where you are and where the real coding happens.
It doesn't feel right.
Of course, choosing something that's extremely large is going to be an overkill, but there are many great projects for beginners that you can choose from. Though you don't need to struggle, pull your hair, and fight tooth and nail as you dissect the repository and slowly understand some part of the project. It's going to feel impossible at first, but if you consistently put the effort, you will see that it's not that complicated. And other than understanding how the project works, you will build technical expertise for real and become comfortable with digesting large amounts of code and figuring things out, which is the single most important muscle that you can develop as a software engineer. Now let's get to how to actually do that. Let's say that you're not a complete beginner and you choose something like Click, and even as a non-beginner, Click is something that's well outside your comfort zone. After running the basic example to get a feel for what this project does, you notice something new, this at syntax. And this is where you Google to see what at means in Python. You learn as you stumble upon new things rather than memorizing something from a tutorial and then letting it wither on the vine. You're going to go to the project's repo, which you can always find by Googling the project's name with GitHub. And first, try to understand what the general structure is. Initially, you'll be overwhelmed and you will have no idea, but this is where everyone starts. The two main things that you need to do are, first, clone the project locally using the git clone command, and then try to figure out the starting point of the example you ran before. Usually, the place to start looking at is the source folder. There you'll have the actual code of the project, and you can start locating the starting point by reading the file's names and reading portions of the code. You can try to change something locally on what you cloned, and then see if it changes some behavior of the example that you run. You can put print statements to further confirm your assumptions. As a nifty trick, you can run that example with the intention that it errors out, so you could see the stack trace of what gets executed, and then you will already know the starting point and invocation path of the code, which is a great start.
This is fantastic.
So as you take time to read the code and play around with the project, you will start getting familiar with parts of it. As you do that, you should start looking at past PRs that merged code in the specific areas that you are somewhat familiar with using git blame. Read the description of the PR and see if you have an idea of what needs to be done. Again, in the beginning, you will probably have no idea and it's going to take time. But you can see the code changes of the PR to see what changes resolve the issue. It's stating the obvious, but you really need to religiously use Google and ChatGPT whenever you have a tricky line of code that you don't understand, or when you're not sure what some method does. This is how you will learn problem solving and unblocking yourself, which is the single most important muscle that you can develop as a software engineer. So to recap, step number 1 was picking a programming language like Python and learning the basics. And then you don't get into the pet project or tutorial loop and you get to step number 2, which is continuously improving your technical skills by choosing an open source project that is challenging to you, getting stuck a lot, putting effort, and this is where the magic happens. And this leads to step number 3, which is landing a software engineering job. And the beautiful thing is that everything that you've done so far is building your confidence and organically setting you up for success. During the application process, you will have awesome stuff to put on your resume, which will help you stand out even among those who have work experience. And you will have cool things to discuss during the interviews. And guess what? This is also going to help you after you land the job, because when you join a team, that team already has a repository they're working on, and you will need to start working your way through it. I had to do that not just when I joined a new company, but whenever I joined a new team. And the more consistently that you do this, the quicker and the more effective you will be when you're on board, and the more strong you're gonna be technically. What's left is to practice the technical lead code questions that you will be asked during interviews. And the two most important things here are also practicing consistently on a daily basis, and choosing quality questions using a top questions list, and following it, which will help you teach yourself the patterns and slowly enable you to solve more and more questions. If all of this sounds like a lot, it's really not that much. You're going to get so much in return if you put aside 2 to 3 hours a day. Doing that, and a few weeks in, you will already see how you're closing the gap between a tutorial expert and an actual programmer.
Congratulations.
If you're wondering what's next after you've built technical expertise in a programming language and you're able to digest large amounts of code and work your way through new repositories, you can start looking into how code is actually deployed in production and the different options that are commonly used for that, like deploying in the cloud serverless or managing your own Kubernetes cluster, and how that and Docker work. So make sure you put in your daily effort and you will get there. It's just a matter of time. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.